Today we are at Hampton Court Palace in south west London to celebrate the Indian soldiers that were cared for in this amazing palace on a Sikh Heritage Day. One of the most important connections with this palace is a person called Princess Sophia Duleep Singh, the daughter of Maharaja Duleep Singh. And we will be hearing much more about her contribution and the experiences and the contributions of Indian soldiers. So please come and join us, and we will be revealing lots of very important items. I've got with me Dr. Duleep Singh, who's been really quite key to the whole exhibition. Briefly, the Indian Army at the Palace, what is this all about?
So this is a small exhibition which really shines a light to the Indian Army that used to come to the Palace for various coronations and peace contingents. They started in 1902 for Edward VII's coronation, and they came in 1911 for George V. And 1937 for George VI's coronation, and they also came here after the First World War. And various contingent sizes came over. And what we want to do is to just bring this to everyone's attention with all these images and objects that we have and some stories.
If we look at this exhibit here at the moment, so it's very interesting in the way in which it chronicles very precise dates and the different historical context.
That's right. I mean, even before they came to the Palace in 1902, Indian Army were coming, predominantly cavalry used to coming for Golden Jubilee and the Diamond Jubilee for Queen Victoria.
This exhibition reveals the largely forgotten stories within the Indian Army, and that's really important, isn't it? That there are so many stories to be told. What was it when you began to uncover this story? What was it that really struck you particularly about this story?
Well, we talk about the Sikh regiments here. In fact, we have two Sikh regiments here, 23rd Sikhs and the 15th Sikhs, and they're here at Home Park in Hampton Court. And what struck me is, you know, the sort of stature of the men and the style and the size of the turbans. And they brought over with them sort of helpers to wash the clothes and to cook the food. And I don't live too far from here, and I didn't know about it.
The Tobi Wala, the Langris and all the other people as well.
That's right, Langris, Tobis, for regiments that were not Sikhs.
Nais as well.
Nais, exactly.
It's fascinating how the caste system was so woven into the way in which the regiments themselves were kind of configured,
That's right. These two, both are Sikh regiments, but recruited from different castes, and that was a reality of that time.
So as we were saying, along with the soldiers, there were other people as well that kind of support, and of course here we've got some Indian doctors.
So the Indian Army brought with it doctors and hospital establishment with them. Here you have an image of 5 of the doctors. It was quite important for them to bring their own doctors because the Indian Army kept within themselves. They didn't mix with the locals. By having their own doctors and ward orderlies, there wouldn't be a need for them to see British doctors.
This is a very powerful, dramatic image here. Just tell us a bit about this one.
Here we have soldiers in 1937 that came over for George VI's coronation. And of course you can see non-Sikhs here. You've got Sikhs around the corner, and highly decorated soldiers who would have seen a lot of action in the First World War.
And of course there were some 1,200 soldiers that came across. It's a kind of phenomenal number, isn't it? And the logistics of that in itself would have been quite interesting. Would they have come over by ship, presumably?
They come over by ship to Southampton. Hampton Court, being in southwest London, is the first sort of palace that they would encounter when they come into London, so it was chosen for that reason. There was 1,200 in 1902, but nearly 1,800 in 1919. And here you see them outside Waterloo Station, walking towards the Peace Parade.
And of course 1919 is a very significant year for Indian history, for Sikh history, because that's when we had the Jallianwala massacre. So some of this, there would be some political kind of tensions around this time as well, wouldn't there?
There would be a lot of geopolitical tensions because, as you say, Amritsar massacre happened in 1919. The Spanish flu was doing the rounds. They're battle hardened. They've lost brothers and sons in the First World War. All this was going on in their minds when they came over here.
One of the interesting things about when they came over in 1919, there was the Spanish flu. Well, the flu was ਤਾਂ ਕਾਫੀ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਕੋਵਿਡ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਮੌਤਾਂ ਮੇਰੇ ਖਿਆਲ 50% of the population of Europe was nearly wiped out. ਪਰ ਫਿਰ ਉਦੋਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਆ ਸਕੇ ਪਰ ਉਹ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਫਿਰ they came afterwards, didn't they? And they actually came into the palace, and this is where they did their march as well, yeah?
Yeah, they missed the parade because of quarantine for 2 weeks. They missed it by 2 weeks. But George V said, they must have their own parade, and they took part, and they were camped here.
ਜੋ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਤੋਂ ਸਾਡਾ ਮਹਾਰਾਜਾ ਰਣਜੀਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਜਿਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਸੁਪੁੱਤਰ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਇੱਥੇ ਬਲੈਤ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਲਿਆ ਗਿਆ ਸੀ, ਦਲੀਪ ਸਿੰਘ, ਉਹਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਲੜਕੀ ਆ ਸੋਫੀਆ ਦਲੀਪ ਸਿੰਘ, ਉਹਦਾ ਦਾ ਵੀ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਇਸ ਪੈਲੇਸ ਨਾਲ ਬਹੁਤ ਗੂੜਾ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਹੈ. It's a very interesting story in itself. So where does this story begin then with Sophia Duleep Singh's connection with the palace?
Well, Princess Sophia Duleep Singh was one of the favourite godchilds of Queen Victoria, and she had a grace and favour apartment across the road, which was then part of the property of the palace. Sophia Duleep Singh had a very sort of intrinsic relationship with Indian soldiers. Even before here, she used to nurse them in Brighton Hospital when they'd been evacuated from the Western Front. That was in 1915. But in 1919, she invited them to come and visit her across the road when they were camped here during the peace contingent. But her own background is she was also revolutionary. And here she is as a suffragette, one of the key suffragettes, outside the palace, campaigning for the rights for all, for women to vote.
And here she's got India insignias. Was she some kind of collecting some money for Indian soldiers? Is that what she was doing?
It's called the Indian Soldiers Fund.
Yeah.
So for them to have the correct uniform and boots, so they used to raise money and buy equipment and send it to make sure the soldiers received it.
So ਜਿੱਥੇ ਇਹ ਸਾਡੀ ਮੈਂ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਸਾਡੀ ਇੱਕ ਧੀ ਆ ਸੋਫੀਆ ਦਲੀਪ ਸਿੰਘ, ਔਰ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਇੱਥੇ UK ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਫਰਜੈਟ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕਿ ਇੱਥੇ ਔਰਤਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵੋਟ ਪਾਉਣ ਦੇ ਹੱਕ ਲਈ ਵੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਵੱਡਾ ਸੰਘਰਸ਼ ਲੜਿਆ. ਆਪਾਂ ਦਿਖਾਉਂਗੇ ਵੀ ਇੱਥੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਜਗ੍ਹਾ ਤੇ ਮੋਰਚਾ ਵੀ ਲਾਇਆ ਸੀ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਨਾਲ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਆਪਣਾ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ ਭੁਲਾਇਆ. ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਣੇ ਰਾਜ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ, ਆਪਣੇ ਬਾਬੇ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਪਤਾ ਸੀ, ਮਹਾਰਾਜਾ ਰਣਜੀਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਕੌਣ ਸੀਗੇ, ਔਰ ਉੱਥੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸੋਲਜਰ ਆਉਂਦੇ ਸੀਗੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਵੀ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਮਲਮ ਪੱਟੀ ਵੀ ਕੀਤੀ, ਹੋਰ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਸਹੂਲਤਾਂ ਵੀ, ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਗੱਲ ਆਪਾਂ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਬ੍ਰਾਈਟਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪਵੇਲੀਅਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਇਹਨੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਘਾਲਣਾ ਕੀਤੀਆਂ, ਔਰ ਇੱਥੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਗ੍ਰਾਈ ਵੀ ਕਰਕੇ ਤਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਸਹੂਲਤਾਂ ਦੇ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਇੱਕ ਸਾਡੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਵੱਡਾ ਲੈਸਨ ਹੈਗਾ ਵੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਆਪਣਾ ਇਤਿਹਾਸ ਨਾ ਭੁਲਾਈਏ ਕਦੇ ਵੀ. ਸੋਫੀਆ ਦਲੀਪ ਸਿੰਘ ਨੇ ਜੋ ਇੱਥੇ ਪੈਸਾ ਜੋ ਗੜਾਈ ਇਕੱਠੀ ਕੀਤੀ ਸੀ, ਜਿੱਥੇ ਪੈਸਾ ਵੀ ਲੈਂਦੇ, ਇੱਕ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਹੋਰ ਵੀ ਇੱਕ ਟੈਕਨੀਕ ਵਰਤੀ ਸੀ ਆ ਜੋ ਪਿਨ ਬੈਜ ਆ.
That's right. Well, it was one of those badges Sophia Duleep Singh used to sell to raise funds for the Indian Soldiers Fund, where they used to collect money to buy equipment for the Indian soldiers.
ਜਿੱਥੇ ਸਿੱਖ ਸੋਲਜਰਸ ਜਾਂ ਇੰਡੀਅਨ ਸੋਲਜਰਸ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ ਤੇ ਉੱਥੇ ਕੱਲੀ ਵੀ ਸਟੋਰੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਡਿਸੈਂਡੈਂਟਸ ਇੱਥੇ ਅਜੇ ਵੀ ਹੈ. ਔਰ ਇੱਕ ਹੈਗਾ ਬਾਬਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੋ ਸਾਡੇ ਤੇਜਪਾਲ ਸਿੰਘ ਡਾਕਟਰ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਗ੍ਰੇਟ ਗ੍ਰੈਂਡਫਾਦਰ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਥੋੜਾ ਦੱਸੋ. ਹਾਂਜੀ
ਹਾਂਜੀ, ਇਸ this Subedar Major Baba Singh, 23rd Sikh pioneer, ਆ ਗੱਬੇ ਬੈਠੇ ਆ. And ਇਹ ਫਰਸਟ ਵਰਲਡ ਵਾਰ ਲੜੇ ਆ, Egypt, Palestine, Aden, ਤੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨਾਲ ਖੜੇ ਆ ਇਹ ਸੂਬੇਦਾਰ ਅਮਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਆ. ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਫਾਦਰ ਜੋ ਸੀਗੇ, he was at the 1902 coronation. ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ great grandson got in touch with me, and he has another photo of my great grandfather which we didn't have. So it's come full circle.
But how does it make you feel? What does it do to you when you learn about this history?
It's a fairly recent phenomenon. I never used to know about it before. Yeah, I mean, it's quite overwhelming. Get quite emotional. But it's something I want to learn about more and tell others about.
We talked about the 1919 massacre. We had a kind of an ambivalent relationship with the British Raj, but that doesn't discount the fact that Sikhs gave lots of kind of showed bravery, gave their lives. We talk about Saragari, and we could talk about what they did in this country as well. So we shouldn't have that conflict, because as far as they were concerned, they were serving King Country and the Guru Granth Sahib as well, though that was also an important part of their Sikh regiments, wasn't it? Their devotion to the Guru Granth Sahib.
It was. I mean, they were served in all ranks, and they were encouraged to keep their faith. In fact, you had to be a very strict, mostly Amritdhari Sikhs were recruited, and they took wherever they went to the Guru Granth Sahib. And in fact, part of the Indian Soldiers Fund, they actually bought Qurbans and Guru Granth Sahibs and Gutkas for the soldiers.
So ਇਹ ਬਹੁਤ ਇੰਪੋਰਟੈਂਟ ਹੈ. ਠੀਕ ਹੈ, ਦੇਖੋ ਹਰੇਕ ਐਮਪਾਇਰ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਉਹ ਆਪਣੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਵਰਤਦੇ ਆ। ਪਰ ਇਹ ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਸੱਚ ਆ, ਜੇ ਬ੍ਰਿਟਿਸ਼ ਐਮਪਾਇਰ ਜਦੋਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਫਿਰ ਸਾਡੇ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਮਿਲਟਰੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬਹੁਤ ਭਰਤੀ ਕੀਤੀ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਇੱਕ ਕੰਡੀਸ਼ਨ ਲਾਇਆ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਜਿੰਨੇ ਵੀ ਸੋਲਜਰ ਸੀ ਉਹ ਅੰਮ੍ਰਿਤਧਾਰੀ ਹੋਣੇ ਚਾਹੀਦੇ ਆ, ਗ੍ਰੰਥੀ ਰੱਖੇ ਸੀਗੇ। ਤੇ ਹੋ ਸਕਦਾ ਜੇ ਉਹ ਨਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਇੰਟਰਵੈਂਸ਼ਨ, ਸਾਡੇ ਅੰਮ੍ਰਿਤਧਾਰੀਆਂ ਦੀ ਗਿਣਤੀ ਹੋਰ ਵੀ ਘੱਟ ਹੋਣੀ ਸੀਗੀ। ਇਹ ਬਹੁਤ ਇੰਪੋਰਟੈਂਟ ਹੈਗੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਨਾ।
It is, especially when you look at the counterbalance against recruitment in the Indian Army was the Arya Samaj and sort of Christian missionaries taking people the other way.
Yeah.
The Indian Army actually said you need to be strict Sikhs to get in.
ਆਹ ਜੋ ਇੱਥੇ ਗਲਾਸ ਕੈਬਨਿਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਐਕਸੀਬਿਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆ ਜੋ ਕੁਝ ਆਈਟਮਸ ਹੈਗੀਆਂ, ਇਹ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਤੇਜਪਾਲ ਸਿੰਘ ਨੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਪਰਸਨਲ ਕਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਡੋਨੇਟ ਕੀਤੀਆਂ। ਔਰ ਥੋੜਾ just tell me a bit about the various objects here.
Well, some of them show, for example, Dobbies washing clothes at Hampton Court Palace. One of the coronations, I think it's 1911. Some of them show some doctors here taking part in parades. And what you'll find here is this is an article from the Times which shows deputation of the British branch of the Khalsa Jatha and military officers from Hampton Court. So these soldiers from Hampton Court who came for 1911 coronation pressed upon Maharaja of Patiala, Bhupinder Singh, for a gurdwara.
ਔਰ ਬੜੀ ਇੰਟਰਸਟਿੰਗ ਸਟੋਰੀ ਆ। ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ UK ਦਾ, ਯੂਰਪ ਦਾ ਪਹਿਲਾ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਾ ਸ਼ੈਪਰਡਸ ਬੁਸ਼ ਆਪਾਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ, ਇੱਥੋਂ ਵੀ ਫੌਜੀ ਗਏ ਸੀਗੇ।
ਹਾਂਜੀ।
ਇੱਥੇ ਸਟੂਡੈਂਟ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਪੜ੍ਹਦੇ ਸੀ ਇੱਥੇ ਲੰਡਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, the 5 students.
That's right.
And they actually took the soldiers along with them just to kind of make sure that the Maharaja.
Yeah.
And he donated, what was it, £8,000?
£8,000, which was Sawa Lakh in terms of rupees, 125,000 rupees.
Yeah. And in those days, that would have been a phenomenal. It would have probably be equivalent now. It would be millions, possibly.
Possibly, yeah, it would be, yeah.
ਹਾਂਜੀ। ਸੋ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਇੱਕ ਬਹੁਤ ਇੰਪੋਰਟੈਂਟ ਚੀਜ਼ ਆ ਵੀ ਇਸ ਪੈਲੇਸ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੀ ਕਨੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਆ ਵੀ ਸਾਡਾ ਪਹਿਲਾ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਾ ਜੇ ਸ਼ਾਇਦ ਇੱਥੋਂ ਨਾ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਤੇ ਸੋਲਜਰ ਤਾਂ ਉੱਥੇ ਸਾਡਾ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਬਣਨਾ ਸੀਗਾ।
ਹਾਂਜੀ। In 1902, when Edward VII had appendicitis, they had to develop a program of what to do with the Indian troops because it was sitting idle for 6 weeks. So this is the program. They took them to various places. If you flip through the other pages, this is when they went to Warwick Castle, Edinburgh, Glasgow, even within London, the Tate, Tower of London.
ਦੇਖੋ ਜੀ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਸੋਲਜਰ ਵੀ ਸੀਗੇ ਤਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਵੀ ਇੱਕ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਬਣਾਇਆ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਵਲਾਇਤ ਦਿਖਾਇਆ ਜਾਵੇ। ਤਾਂ it may well be that there's a whole other history that may well be uncovered in terms of their records of visiting these places. Yeah,
They could be, and it was also a propaganda tool.
Yeah.
Where these soldiers went back to India and said they treated us so well.
Yeah,
This is great for recruitment.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. It's a double-edged sword, isn't it? I mean, all history is a double-edged sword. You can take history negatively or positive, and it's probably getting that balance right, isn't it?
These are watercolors by an artist called William Luca. And in 1919, there were 1,800 troops here. And if you flick through these pages, you'll see the troops doing various activities, playing sports, standing to attention, taking parades. So here you can see just outside the palace, but this is where we are now. And you can see the pathways outside. You can see them marching in. And here you can see some locals sitting on the bench, watching in awe of these Indian soldiers who were so tall. I mean, they're probably selected for their height as well. But with the turban, they looked even taller. And you've got to remember, 100 years ago, most people have not seen Indians. So this would have been.
So ਇੱਕ ਬਹੁਤ ਇੰਟਰਸਟਿੰਗ ਫੈਕਟ ਹੈ। ਆਪਾਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਬ੍ਰਿਟਿਸ਼ ਦੀ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਖਾਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਪੁਰਾਣੇ ਜ਼ਮਾਨੇ ਦੇ ਬ੍ਰਿਟਿਸ਼ ਸੀਗੇ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਇਮੈਜੀਨੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਿੱਖ ਸਰਦਾਰਾਂ ਦੀ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਸਤਿਕਾਰ ਮਾਨ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਇਹ ਯੋਧੇ ਆ। ਔਰ ਇਸ ਇੱਕ ਮਿਥ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀਗੀ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਹਾਂ, we seen that with their turbans they were already selected maybe 6 foot. With the turban and they were high, they probably appeared as 7 foot tall giants almost. So the locals must have been, I mean, you can see they must have been in awe of this kind of a spectacle. We've got with us one of the key kind of inspirations, organisers behind this whole exhibition, Rav Singh, and of course he's no stranger to the Punjab Broadcast Channel, from the Little History of the Sikhs. So Rav, we're going to talk about some of these silhouettes, but just give me an overview of the whole kind of, what are you trying to achieve here, what is it all about?
So really, I think the story of A Little History of the Sikhs is a story of young people finding their identity. We walk the streets of London and we get to know our history through the streets of London. And I think in the last few years, all the work I've been doing, after 10 years of being inside the Gurdwara, I'm now in non-Gurdwara spaces, but telling our stories, and that's what we're trying to do.
Hampton Court, this is a phenomenal kind of major exhibition. Just tell us about that.
So in 2021 we were approached by Hampton Court. There's a charity called Standing with Giants, and they produce the traditional World War I Tommy soldier who's next to us there. And as you look at the Tommy soldier and you see them all over England. They appear during November, and they had approached Hampton Court to put the Tommy soldiers here, and the Hampton Court team said, well, actually we've got some history here as well, and we want to somehow see if that could work. So they contacted us and they said, look, the Indian Army were encamped here, as you know. We want to try and incorporate the silhouette for the Indian Army to represent them. And I reached out to Avdar and Dejpal, and we became part of a project to design this, what we call the Sikh soldier silhouette, representative of the Indian Army. And when I came on my first visit, it was, I thought, because we designed this all in lockdown on computers, and I came and I just said to the security guard, I don't know if you know where it is, but I'm here to see a Sikh soldier silhouette in the East Front Gardens. And he said to me, Mr. Singh, I think you'll find there's a lot more than one. So what the palace had done, they commissioned 25.
Wow.
And the 25 sit within the 100 Tommies. And the interesting thing for me is when I saw them as an art display together, look at the Tommy, his head is down, like this is World War I, they're defeated, Europe is kind of broken.
And the Sikhs are proud.
And just without even knowing, Buddy, without even knowing, we had designed a soldier who's always upright, even though coming out of World War I. So that's when I saw the display together, I was like, I think I made the right decision.
The feelings are important as the kind of facts, if you like. We're stood on a site where about 115 years ago, maybe 120 years ago, there were, 1911, hundreds and thousands of Sikh soldiers marching down here. We've got one-dimensional silhouettes here, or two-dimensional. Just what does it make you feel when you know that you're stood on this ground where we had that history here?
I think, we've been running these tours for 2 years here. And when we've only had this, we didn't have the exhibition for the last 2 years. And when I see young people, families, elders come here, and they were actually, this represents where history happened.
But how do you feel being stood on the turf where you had
it is emotional.
Those Sikhs camped out over here, marching here,
cooking here, taking their daily life from a summer here. And our history is long and it's entwined and it's shared history here. This is a space that for Sikhs, there was the story's been forgotten. We all think Sikhs are from Southall, and Southall is only 6 miles up the road. And yet 50 years before the Southall story, there was a Hampton Court story.
And of course the story of the first Sikh Gurdwara, in some senses,
from here.
Is from here, isn't it?
From here, and as we said in the exhibition, there's a group of officers photo, and those officers were the ones who went with the 5 students, Teja Singh and the students, supported the students with the meeting with
down to Holland Park,
and got the premises at Holland Park.
So we've got Major Dalwinder Singh Virdi with us here. You can say one of the new generation of British Sikh soldiers. In this exhibition, we've been commemorating a previous history of British Sikh soldiers in Hampton Court and on these lands. What does it make you feel in terms of the connection that you have with that history?
So for us, these stories give us a lot of inspiration. They connect us to, they help us understand where we belong. In this country and within the army today. So for example, we heard today lots of stories about how the Indian Army were here for the coronations of UK monarchs. And what's amazing to see today, we saw King Charles III's coronation, and there were 3 Sikhs proudly wearing the dastars, their turbans on parade at King Charles's coronation. So that story is an amazing story. It fills us a lot with pride and gives us a lot of inspiration, and it helps us serve today.
So of course, you're in the British Army. We had those Sikh soldiers who were in the British Army. Well, there was a Sikh freedom fight movement. There was the 1919 Jallianwala massacre. Here we talk about what happened in 1984. So what do you say to those people who say actually Sikhs should have nothing to do with the British period?
So yes, absolutely. It's important to understand that Sikhs have had a very interesting history alongside the British. A lot of us are here because of that history, and a lot of that history is, you could argue it's not good, or bad things happened. There was loss of life. There was injustices that happened. But the way I and many others look at it today is to say, I was born and raised here. This is a society I live in. It's my home. We have freedoms here that arguably we don't enjoy in other places around the world, and for us, I feel part of this community, and therefore I serve this community wearing this uniform. So I completely understand there are historical things that have happened in the past which are bad, and we need to call them bad. We need to remember them. We can't forget these things.
That's it.
But I think again, to go forward, how do we move forward from these things is to join these organizations, be part of it, and be the change you want to see.
Yeah, so we learn from history and we try to avoid history repeating itself. Often young Sikhs growing up in this society can feel a sense of non-belonging or a sense of even racial discrimination, and that can affect their confidence and self-esteem. How does remembering these kind of histories build your confidence? How has it impacted you at a personal level?
So growing up, I'm sure many other ethnic minorities, not just Sikhs, have had the comment of go back to your home. For me, being born and raised here, this is my home. I know nothing else apart from this place. So stories like this really ultimately help me connect and me belong with the society and the culture around me. But also, we are different, and it's important to celebrate our uniqueness, so you celebrate our unique Sikh Punjabi heritage, and we shouldn't forget that. So stories like this, being here at Hampton Court Palace, helps us tell our story, gives us a platform to tell our story and to show that we're not just part of society today, but we always have been.
I think it's a really brilliant point. I mean, I just want to emphasize that. We can't change history. We can learn from history, but we can also need to claim our history, because no history is pure. Nobody makes history according to their own whims, and it's the heroism that we get inspiration from. Just like the Saragari, we know the heroism of the Sikh soldiers in World War I, in World War II, and even today, people like Dal who are serving in the British Army. And I would like to think, and I've no doubt that he serves with great honour and with great ethics as well to do good. And it's not just about imperialism and some of the kind of negative stories that we have as well. So thank you very much, Dal. So I've got with me now Vani Sadeshna Suryan, who's involved with the Little History of the Sikhs, but has also been very active and engaged with this exhibition. So we're here, stood actually outside the Long Water, and we've got a very special plaque here. So Vani, just tell us a bit about this plaque and what's the story that's being told here.
Absolutely. So here on the right hand side of the Long Water you can see Home Park, and this was the main location where all of the Indian soldiers would camp during their times here. This plaque was put in here as a permanent installation so that we would have something once the exhibition and once the Standing with Giants silhouettes have gone to permanently commemorate this moment and our recognition of Indian soldier encampments in this area. So on the plaque here we talk a little bit about the four main occasions on which the soldiers came here and stayed in Home Park. They were the coronations of Edward VII, George V and George VI, as well as the First World War parades in 1919. On this side here we have a plan for the coronation camp in 1937. Here you can see all the details of where exactly they planned to put all the camps out. Around this time you had almost 1,800 Indian Army soldiers, workers, dhobis, barbers from different regiments who will all come here and take care of them during this time. Here we've got a picture of some of these soldiers commemorating the time that they took during the 1919 parade to celebrate their involvement in the peace of after World War I. Over here we have a quote from King George V himself commemorating the Indian soldiers by saying, "I heartily thank all my Indian soldiers for their loyal devotion to me and to my empire, and for their sufferings cheerfully borne in the various campaigns in which they have served, in lands and climates so very different from their own." On this side here we have a quote from a letter that we've seen in the exhibition from a wounded Punjabi Rajput to a relative in India, where he says, "This is not war. It is the ending of the world. This is just such a war as was related in the Mahabharata about our forefathers." I think that's a really potent reminder of the kind of ways in which the Indian soldiers here were creating these stories in their minds and experiencing this through the lens of their own. This was such a foreign environment to them to be here in weathers just like this, camped out over here on this land right here, and trying to think about how to explain to family back home about what the experience of war is really like. It shows you exactly how damaging and how terrifying it must have been, because the only way they could possibly explain the gravity of the situation is to compare it to the Mahabharata. The life that the Indian soldiers had here at the camp, where we have up to 1,500 soldiers and many others who were here just on these fields over here. It was laid out like a village with streets dividing each of the regiments, and they all had their own cooks and cleaners and whatnot, and it was kept incredibly separately. But they stayed here for a very, very long time, and the cultural needs of each of the regiments was definitely taken care of during this time. And here we have some more pictures showing what the Sikh soldiers were like during their time here. We have Sikh soldiers here in civilian clothing throwing chukkers at Hampton Court. And here we have a barber shaving another soldier at the coronation camp at Hampton Court. So one really good thing about this board is the fact that no matter what, this is going to stay here, and this is a solid commemoration of the role that Indian soldiers played here. And it will be here permanently, so whenever we come to stand here in the future, we can look over and know that it was our ancestors who stayed along this path over here, who stayed here with their regiments, and who were commemorated by the royal family for the service that they provided during the First World War.
How did you feel about Sophia when you actually heard about the history?
So for me, I live just 2 minutes down the road. I've been born and raised in this area, and I have always learned about Hampton Court Palace through the lens of Tudor monarchs and Henry VIII and all that machismo. And when I first found out the stories of Sophia, as well as the Indian soldiers and the Sikh soldiers who held such a presence here, it's such a powerful moment to recognise that this land that once I always saw as being this white colonial British history with all its majesty, to know that there was an Indian princess, a Sikh Indian princess who fought for the rights that I now take for granted for myself, and Indian soldiers who came from the same villages as my ancestors to be based on the land that is just so close to my home. It's
amazing.
It is, it really is. It's deeply emotional. It makes me feel a sense of pride and belonging here that I have never felt before.
So you felt like you were in your own sort of a place, like a home?
Absolutely, yeah. It's Indian history has not really been highlighted much in Britain. It's very much land of the homeland and the stories that I'd hear from there, from my grandfathers and all, but to now know that where I was born, where I was raised, where I went to school, just round there, this is all part of that same history. That I and people like me, people from my areas, have all belonged here as well as my own. It makes me almost impassioned to think, how can I, as a British Sikh, contribute to this legacy of British Sikh history in Hampton Court Palace? Sophia Duleep Singh was the daughter of Maharaja Duleep Singh and the granddaughter of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, the last ruler of Punjab. She was born here alongside her siblings as the goddaughter of Queen Victoria. She was raised amongst the English nobility, and they lived a very luxurious life under Queen Victoria's help. So she would provide a lot of money and let them grow up as part of the nobility. Then one day, Sophia goes to Delhi. And she goes there just originally as a party that she thought all of her friends are going to, until she suddenly sees that these were her people. She saw people who looked like her, people who were suffering, people who knew who she was and knew who
So
her
she had
grandfather
a kind of
was.
revelation, a transformation.
Absolutely. She went to visit Lahore and she saw the land that she once owned. And for her, suddenly, she'd lived this very frivolous life, spending a lot of her money and being part of the British. But you can see in that moment where she suddenly developed that contempt for everything that the British had taken away from her.
And is this after Duleep Singh passes away, or is it while he's still alive?
This is. So Duleep Singh had left the family at that time, so
Okay.
she was growing up with just her mother and her sisters here under the help of Queen Victoria. But when she comes back, she suddenly feels no loyalty towards Victoria. She's seen what Victoria has done, and she said, this is not worth it anymore. It's not worth living my life like this. I can't stand by and let people suffer. Victoria had given her a small apartment just on the outskirts of the palace called Faraday House, and this is where she stayed. It's the longest known residence that she had in London.
So how long did she live?
50 years.
50 years.
50 years.
So Sophia Duleep Singh lived on this in this palace in the ground for 50 years. 50 साल वास्ते रही है. And Faraday House is of course named after the very famous Michael Faraday.
Absolutely,
The
yes.
physicist,
Yeah, who lived just there before her.
Yeah.
But she stayed here. This was the apartment that was given to her by Queen Victoria as one of her godchildren. And she'd had all this favour. But when she came back from India, she started thinking to herself,
Okay.
I'm not living like this anymore.
Yeah.
I'm going to use this and achieve something good. She taught herself Punjabi. She went out of her way to find ways that she could help, and she had seen all those freedom fighters back in Punjab and thought, you know what, I want to be part of this journey. I want to be part of the fight for rights. So she comes back here and she joins the Women's Social Political Union, where she becomes a vocal suffragette, one of the very militant suffragettes who's standing there fighting for our rights. She goes and throws herself in front of the MP's cars who were fighting against their women's rights. She sells all of her jewellery and uses that money to bail other suffragettes out of jail.
Wow.
She sets up, and there's a very famous picture of her standing right outside the gate of Hampton Court Palace, standing with a suffragette postcard and selling copies of the magazine to people. And that image angered the royalty so much.
And there is of course a blue plaque that even today commemorates that connection
Absolutely,
with her.
yep. It calls her Sophia Duleep Singh, women's suffragette fighter.
You know, it's tragic that you know we don't know about her history generally in terms of connection with the Punjab, but we didn't even know about the fact that she was a suffragette in this country, and I don't know who to blame for that, because there was that film about the suffragettes, and she didn't appear in that film. How did it make you feel when our history is erased, and who's responsible for that?
This all was happening at a time where not only were the suffragettes hated, but on top of that, the idea of immigrants taking part in things and not being grateful for any support they could get was almost looked down on. So for years, Indian history, British history was erasing the presence of Sikhs, erasing the presence of Punjabis who were fighting for things. And we had the same issue going throughout the entire 20th century. But I am honestly proud to say finally we are beginning to reverse that, and we are beginning to recognise the stories of these people who were as instrumental a part as any of the other white faces who took part in the suffragette movement.
And of course, coming back to Hampton Court Palace, I suppose whenever Indian soldiers, Sikh soldiers were here, Sophia would be there to welcome them, to kind of almost host them as well.
Absolutely, yeah. So once the war broke out and the soldiers started coming here, Sophia took a break from her suffragette activities and went to the bedside of these Sikh soldiers and took part as a Red Cross nurse. Now, a lot of these soldiers had only ever had these talks from the King and the Queen of Britain and all, but there are tales that they've told, and they've written stories and letters to their families back home where they mention it's Ranjit Singh's granddaughter, the Maharani, came to us, and she was the one who stood beside us and healed us in these moments.
And of course we know that in Brighton as well, at the Brighton Pavilion, she was quite active in terms of, because not all those soldiers were receiving the kind of care that they wanted, and so she was campaigning, just like campaigning for women's rights, she was campaigning for the rights of those soldiers as well.
Absolutely, yes. So she established the Indian Soldiers Fund and raised enough money to create almost 55,000 huts for Indian soldiers all across the world where they were based in encampments.
So in terms of, I mean, a lot of effort has been put into making this exhibition happen. And just uncovering that kind of history is itself very time consuming. So what are the benefits for young people today who might see themselves as third generation Sikhs, who think the Punjab is some distant land? What relevance does this history have for them?
Well, I'll give you the example of my story. I grew up 2 minutes away from Faraday House, and I have always visited Hampton Court Palace as this place of Tudor majesty, and all these white royals who held, these gravitas and the grandiose sort of culture that they had. And these were the stories that were taught to us in school. This is all I had ever heard about from this palace, and we'd come here and visit on school trips, and this is all I ever knew. When I first found out about Sophia, about Faraday House, and about the Indian soldiers who made their camp here, I felt like for the first time I truly belonged to this place. This has always been my neighbourhood. This has always been where I've been born and raised up, and my neighbourhood's always taken great pride in their history. But I never really felt a connection until that moment. And now for me, I can open my front door and I see the words Singh and suffragette on an English heritage plaque. To me, that instills me with great pride.
Amazing,
to know I'm walking the same roads as people like an Indian princess who fought for my own right to vote, for the people who came to fight for this country, who came from the same villages that my ancestors did. It's important for young people all across Britain who've often felt disconnected from that Punjabi Sikh history to recognise that these spaces that you thought are predominantly English spaces are not.
Today, we've heard from Rani, we've heard from other people as well, and we've seen the exhibition. I think that we need to take inspiration from this work, but also I think that what this example teaches us is a lot more work to be done. We are probably scratching the surface of our own history, and if that's because the victors always tell their story. The victors will often erase the stories of those that they've ruled. And now the sad thing is, Sikhs, after we lost the empire, our fortunes went downhill. But it's when you recount those histories that then lifts your spirit up again. And it's not a spirit to go on conquest, nobody's interested. Maybe that was a previous age of kings and queens. We're not saying that we want to return monarchies, but what we want to know is, as the African proverb says, a nation without a knowledge of its own history is like a tree without roots. So this will give us roots, it will give us a sense of belonging from which we can build confidence. And I think once you have confidence, Vani, I think that nothing can really stop you in achieving whatever you want to achieve in life.
I can finally walk the streets of my own neighbourhood knowing that people who look like me did so here, and they fought for things that were right. It makes you feel strong inside.
So do visit this exhibition. It's going to be going on for some months to come, and hopefully we will come back here, BBC, and maybe have a further visit and even some discussions about Sikh history. So thank you very much. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.